Cell salt astrology calcium fluoride. I'm going to break this into two parts. The first part will be just general affinities about the tissue, and the second part will be on the esoteric side of things into terms of the sign of Cancer, but I'm going to do that in a separate video. So there'll be parts 1 and there'll be parts 2. This salt, generally, we're going to talk about organ and tissue affinities and just general signs and symptoms for the lay people to be able to see what this salt can actually do in terms of being able to recognize, just to do the basic diagnosis for themselves and their children. Because kids respond really well to these salts. And like we all do, but especially if you have good knowledge of these salts, you'll be able to easily treat your children with a lot of basic health problems. So basically with this salt, the organs and tissue affinities with this are clearly anything to do with calcium is going to be to do with the bones, the veins, the tooth enamel, the tendons, sinews, glands, elastic fiber, periosteum, which is the bone covering, the throat, the larynx, the binding of the tissues and elasticity of tissues. This is one of the really key things about this salt, with the elasticity of the tissues, the veins. And when we get more into the esoteric stuff, there's pretty substantial reasons why this is, but I don't want to talk about that here. But on the next part we will. And there's certain conditions that will affect it, this salt, in terms of weather conditions, atmospheric conditions that may give us signs and symptoms of how it affects our body. So symptoms can become cold, worse in cold, wet, change of weather and damp weather, sprains, and symptoms obviously can be better for motion, heat, applications of heat and rubbing, so to speak. And basically the key deficient signs you'll see with this are brittle, splitting, soft nails, cracking of the skin. A lot of people can get cracking and calluses, really dry, cracked skin around the hands and feet, and low body temperature and sweaty feet. And basically the disease conditions of this you will see bone problems, cataracts, tooth enamel problems, yellowing of the teeth, you can see, is one of the key signs for this salt. Hardening of glands, things that become hard, tumors, weak connective tissue, scoliosis, scar tissue, and potential splinters. And splinters is more to do with the cracks in the skin. A lot of calcium deficiency, one of the key signs, and this can be connected to Calc Fluor in some stages too, with the cracking of the skin. Now, there's a very good, just on the psychological level with all calcium deficiencies, and this will apply to Calc Fluor and Calc Fluor together, but usually there can be definitely a wandering and scattered mind, which can give rise to a lot of anxiety with a calcium deficiency in general. So a mind that kind of lacks boundaries and can easily burn out. And there's deeper reasons for this, but also there can be one of the main concerns, particularly for children at school, will be the child who cannot concentrate at all. The mind wanders all the time. They can't focus. And a lot of homeopaths will talk about, and naturopaths generally will talk that for children who, all behavioral problems really come to calcium deficiency. And I would put that down to Calc Fluor particularly, but also I'd say calcium fluoride as well. And also, one of the main concerns is with this tissue in terms of that psychological hypermobile kind of mind wandering, scattering, the one of the key aspects for this deficiency is people will constantly be wondering about and pondering finances and being very, very stressed and about money and wealth, and not being either to they can potentially hoard it or just have that inability to let go, or they're constantly just worrying about it, almost like obsessively. And there's a reason for this, and I'll get into that in the next video, more on the esoteric side of things connected to the astrology. But generally, this salt can let's just go through a few things that it can affect. So basically, like I was saying before, any kind of cracks in the skin, cracked lips, particularly as well. There can be potentially blurred vision and straining of the eyes, and it can lead to cataracts long-term for long-term deficiencies. There can be stuffy head, almost brain fog. I would connect this salt to brain fog type symptoms, with also thick yellow phlegm, foul smelling discharge. Of course, if that's the case, you need to really probably combine it with silica, because those two salts really go hand in hand. There can also be this one of the really interesting things I think about this salt in connection to Chinese medicine is to do with the function of the spleen. And Inez Perry, in the next talk I'll do on the esoteric side of things, gets right into this with the spleen, because the spleen's kind of a very different, unusual organ, particularly in Western medicine. They don't really know what it kind of does. But this salt, I would say, is one of the key things for prolapse. So prolapsed organs, and in Chinese medicine, the spleen has a raising function, so it raises organs and holds them in place. So this salt is definitely connected to spleen deficiency, or what they call spleen qi sinking. And one of the other characteristics of spleen qi deficiency is the swollen tongue. And we have this, and this is one of the indicators for Calc Fluor as well, the swelling of the tongue, or the cracks in the tongue, cracked appearance in the tongues. But it's definitely connected to this prolapse. And I would also say this is also connected to men who have swelling and hardening of the testicles, and particularly do get testicular pain combined with lower back pain. This salt is definitely indicated. So there's an incredible function with this in terms of connection with the spleen, and I would say connection with the blood. So the spleen produces blood in Chinese medicine, and when I get into Inez Perry's work, the next one, we'll talk a lot about that. But definitely this down-bearing sensation, this prolapse feeling, even women who get that down-bearing sensation when it comes to menstruation, this salt is indicated. And also, so there's this other function which is a real key for this, is this elasticity when in connection to veins. So when the veins become, particularly this salt is very indicated for varicose veins. It's one of the key salts for this. It's really important salt on that level. And particularly also people who are hyperflexible, because this is going to affect the sinews as well. People who have, a very easy, hyperflexible in terms of they can easily do damage to themselves. Whatever exercise it is they're doing, this salt will help strengthen the ligaments as well as that. And then also talking about that spleen qi deficiency I was talking about before, from that Chinese medical point of view, and the prolapses. This is one of the key salts for people who suffer from hemorrhoids, particularly recurring hemorrhoids, the protruding ones or the itching hemorrhoids, and also that ones that can be accompanied with obviously constipation and back pain. So these salts are kind of, they're so multi-dimensional, they're so multi-layered, and they usually do work well in combinations with other salts, and Calc Fluor is definitely one of the ones that works extremely well for silica, particularly for infections. Infections when you got exudations from the skin or in the nose that actually have a very strong foul smell, this salt is indicated. It's also indicated for, like I was saying before, the hands and lips are chapped, they're cracked, and also can, when you see the nails grow and they tend to hang and they bend, it's the hang nails is another one they're indicated for. Now, some of the facial symptoms that can be indicated for this will be, you can see the fan-shaped wrinkles around the eyes. There's also the cyanosis of the lips, which is a very strong indicator for Calc Fluor deficiency. Because as the arterial and muscle strength is weakened, it can't circulate that well. So you see that cyanosis, which means the bluish tinge around the lips, meaning the heart's working harder to try and push the blood through. There can also be translucent tips on the teeth, like I said before, particularly with this. So the translucent tip will be indicated of Calc Phos and Calc Fluor. And then also it can indicate, particularly Calc Fluor, the difference between the two will be the yellowing of the teeth. There can also be a black or brownish colouring around, often under the eyes, which is a little bit difficult to discriminate between that and iron deficiency. But I'd say the iron deficiency with the darker rings under the eyes would be more indicative of that, and the Calc Fluor one is a little more lighter in shades. So I just wanted to talk briefly about this, and next talk we'll get right into the esoteric side of the sign of cancer in terms of connection to this tissue salt. So stay tuned for part 2 for that.